Good evening, everyone. How's everybody doing tonight? First off, I'd like to thank everybody for coming out tonight down here at the Florida Cracker Fish Company, and this is our inaugural first bourbon dinner that we have done down here. We've been doing them for about 3 years now between Brooksville and Dade City at Lunch on Limoges, but it's our first one here. So, guys, we might shuffle our feet, stub our toes. We're still getting our ways around, but so far, it looks like the flow and everything's looking well. And I want to thank y'all for making it tonight. Tonight is a special dinner. We have the Old Forester Whiskey Row Bourbon Dinner. We have Mr. Anthony all the way down from Kentucky to talk about Old Forester and what Whiskey Row is. And it's just going to be a fun night. Don't be afraid to ask some questions. He's going to go through it, and we're going to have a little fun. So, guys, I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Anthony.
Thank you, sir. Guys, I just want to say this could not be done without that gentleman named Blair right there. His brother Ethan in the kitchen. All the front of the house and the back of the house people at Florida Cracker. Obviously, Breakthrough Beverage and Brown Foreman, so thank you so much for having us. And you guys want to taste some whiskey? Yeah. All right, this is going to be a fun introduction to whiskey 101. We're going to take some deep notes, some deep cuts. Please raise your hand if you have a question. No question, no answer. No question is too dumb to answer. Please, we're all learning on this together. So, by around anyone, hands in the air, who's heard of the name George Gervin Brown? Nobody. Perfect. Got a lot of work to do here. So, George Gervin Brown was the founder of Old Forester. Back in the mid-1800s to late 1800s, he was a pharmaceutical salesman. So he went around Kentucky door to door selling his opiates, his quinine, all the good stuff that you needed back to survive back in the day. As he went door to door to people, he realized a lot of people had some issues with the current state of American whiskey. So there were some folks called rectifiers out there. These rectifiers would grab barrels of whiskey because you didn't bottle it. The glass was too expensive, so people would sell barrels of whiskey. So these rectifiers, when you make whiskey, it's a slow and low process. Anytime money's involved, people get a little greedy. So you had these rectifiers in Kentucky that would grab your really good whiskey, and then they would add stuff to make it mature faster, right? Because once we put our moonshine in the barrel, let that age over the year, and that's when you get all your lovely flavors and aromas, right? That takes time and it costs money. So these dirty rectifiers would want to speed up that maturation process. You know what they would add in the barrels? They would add nice stuff like caramel coloring, right? And honey. They would also add spittoon spit, tobacco spit, rusty nails, anything you can do to enhance the color and the flavor of whiskey without waiting the 6 to 8 to 10 years to mature, right? Well, thank God we had a lovely guy named George Gervin Brown, right? So George Gervin Brown said, I don't want to do that. We need to have a high-quality, consistent product. So he had a really good friend. He was a medicine man. Guess what his name was? Dr. William Forester. Dr. William Forester was a local hero, a local celebrity. And what he would do, he would bottle and brand his medicine. So George said, I like that process. So George, when he would grab his barrels from each distillery throughout Kentucky, he asked for the blessing of Dr. Forester. He goes, I'm going to blend my whiskey. I'm going to put it in a bottle. I'm going to cork it and put my stamp on it so people know it's quality. And guess what he named that bourbon? Old Forester. Little people don't know that actually Dr. Forester had 2 R's in his name. If you look at a bottle of Old Forester, there's only one R. Do you know why that is? Somebody probably didn't want to get paid out. I don't know. We don't talk about that anymore. But that's the whole point. So we are the first bottled bourbon ever. George Gervin Brown started bottling his whiskey back in 1870. So we're going to do a little taste through history from 1870 to Prohibition to this lovely single barrel that these folks here. So you guys all ready to taste some whiskey? All right. I can't hear you, man. Make some noise. All right. Blair, are we ready for the first course? They got it out? Fantastic. All right, guys. So we're going to do a little whiskey tasting 101. We're going to talk through it. So the first variant we're going to taste is the 1870 small batch. This is close. This is going to be on your left-hand side, all the way to your left. Yes, very small font. So in 1870, we went back in time and we figured out this is the closest variant to what George started blending. So George Gervin Brown, he took barrels from 3 distilleries, and they each had different rickhouses For those who don't know, a rick house is where you age your whiskey. You put your moonshine in a barrel, and you set it low and slow, and it ages and gets all its flavor. George pulled his whiskey from 3 different rick houses. One was a stone, one was a metal, and one was a wood rick house. To this date, we have currently all 3 rick houses on our property in Louisville. So this is a light, refreshing, very subtle blend. And we do small batch at Old Forester, generally 50 barrels or less. But to go true to George's original batch, we're doing a 21-barrel blend. So 3 different warehouses, 7 barrels each, right? So this is the original small batch. So we're tasting whiskey, right? First thing we want to do, want to put that glass in the air. Cheers to the gods, obviously. But what are we looking for? We're looking for color, right? We're not looking for flies or anything bad, but we're looking for color. And where does that color come from? From nails and spittoon spit. No, it comes from the aging of the barrel, right? So what you want to do next, after we take a look at the color, that beautiful dark amber hue, we want to put it up to our nose and get that first aroma. Oh, sorry. Man down. Make sure when you're getting that initial aroma, open your mouth, right? Open those olfactory glands. Get that rich aroma. So lovely notes of clove spice, medley of citrus. You're getting orange. You're getting grapefruit. A little bit of caramel. Next thing is the next important step. We're going to get that initial taste, right? So once you get that initial taste, open your mouth, take a little drink in, let it coat your jowls around your tongue. You're going to get something we call the Kentucky hug. It's going to warm your chest all the way down to your feet. Make sure you blow that out. Or the Kentucky hug might go into something we call the Kentucky chokehold. Right. So embrace that Kentucky cousin that y'all never knew you had. Talking about flavor and initial taste, right? We got baking spices and kitchen spices. We're not talking about salt and pepper. We're talking about nutmeg, clove, and cinnamon. And then obviously the third most important part of any whiskey tasting is the finish. This 1870 is a 90 proof bourbon coming in at 72% corn, where you get your sweetness, 18% rye, where you get your little cherry notes, your spices, and 10% malted barley, which you kind of get those nice deep earth tones. So it's got a long, slow, lingering finish with a little bit of fruit and spice. Make some noise if you like the 1870. All right. I'll tell you one thing. It's only going to get better than that, all right? We're going to go up in flavor. Brown-Forman is a creature of habit, and we have the ideology of more alcohol, more oil, more flavor. So that's my first reverend for you guys. Thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, are you all ready for round 2? A round of applause for round 2. All right, I don't feel the love yet. I don't feel the love. All right, I feel the love. All right. So we tasted the original batch, the 1870. So the next one to your right is going to be the 1897 Bottled and Bond. Fun fact about Bottled and Bond. This is about the same time the government decided to agree with the ideology of George Gervin Brown. Anybody, raise your hand. Do you know what the Bottled and Bond Act of 1897 was? All right, good thing I do. Quality of whiskey was shit, right? Nobody wanted any under this rectifier spirit, right? We got rusty nails, we had spittoon spit, all this poor stuff. There was no quality control. So the government finally stepped in 1897 and said, all American whiskey, all bourbon has to be bottled no less than 100 proof and has to sit in government over-regulated warehouses, right? Anytime the government gets involved, kind of shysty, right? A little shady, but this was for a good reason. We want to make sure people were getting good bourbon, not watered down, okay? So the 1897 is a 4-year bourbon. Same mash bill as the 1870. Fun fact, it is 10 more proof than the 1870. So what did we talk earlier? More alcohol, more proof, more oil, more flavor. So 72 corn, 18 rye, 10 malted barley. It's a 4-year bourbon. This is another small batch from Brown-Forman. Small batch meaning 50 barrels or less. When we also talk about proof, by a round of a hand or a round of applause, who knows where the term proof came from? So back in the day, also talking about these nasty rectifiers, right? They'd water down their bourbon. They'd add all this nasty stuff. So when you go out and you buy a barrel of bourbon, you didn't know what consistency and what quality product you were getting. So they needed proof. People traded whiskey for clothing, for medicine, for housing, for property. So you wanted to make sure you weren't getting ripped off. So before you bought a barrel of bourbon, you take that whiskey bottle, that barrel, you turn it on its side, the whiskey would run out down the table, and you light it on fire. The higher the flame grew, the bluer the flame grew, the bluer the flame was, the more proof that you were getting high-quality whiskey. Round of applause for proof, guys. Make some noise for proof. All right. Yeah. There we go. Now we're going. All right, so bring this glass in the air. You want to take a look at it, right? That deep, rich amber color, it's going to be the same color as the 1870 because it is the same age statement. Well, notice down the line, the longer the age, the darker the booze, right? One cool thing about legs. Who's heard about legs when you're talking about whiskey, not about women? Who said that, you? So when you take your glass, and we'll do this on the last glass as well, but take that glass and kind of whisk it around in the air. Look kind of fancy for me. Legs are alcohol, legs are oil, fat deposits from the whiskey. Higher the alcohol, more flavor, better legs. And that whiskey's going to stick and slide down that glass. So we want to put our nose in this glass. We're going to get that nice robust. We're going to get some heavy baking spices. We're going to get rich caramel, a little bit of vanilla with roasted coffee notes, dark fruit spice, and mature oak flavors. This 1897 is an amazing whiskey if anyone makes eggnog down here in South Florida. Take your first sip, blow that out, get that Kentucky hug. Stay away from the Kentucky chokehold. This is a nice, creamy, mouth-filling bourbon, right? Sweet and intense, deep fruit notes, heavy oak notes layered in dark caramel and vanilla. And Chef Ethan is pairing this with some oven-roasted pork shoulder. Oven-roasted pork shoulder with maple glazed Johnny cakes and conch pea succotash. Make some noise for succotash. All right. So by a show of hands, who's feeling the 1897 over the 1870? Right? More alcohol, more oil, more flavor, right? It's the name of the game.
All right, guys. We have our last course before dessert. And what we have coming out now is a pan-seared halibut with cheddar cheese grits and, of course, our tomato gravy. So to put halibut with cheese grits and tomato gravy, y'all are in for a surprise. Y'all enjoy, guys.
Are you guys ready for our third whiskey? Let me hear you say yeah. Let me see yeah. All right. So a little story time here. This is 1910. The same year my father was born. No, I'm joking. So 1910. On historic Whiskey Row in downtown Louisville. Raise your hand. Anyone heard of Whiskey Row? Have you? What do you know about Whiskey Row?
I went to Whiskey Row.
You've been there, but what do you know about it?
I drank a lot of whiskey.
She drank a lot of whiskey. That's a great answer. So back in the late 1800s, all of the purveyors and all of the distillers would ship a majority of the boatload of their whiskey on trains and wagons to downtown Louisville on Main Street. They put so much business and so much money into the community by bringing so much whiskey onto that street. The government named that Whiskey Row, and that's kind of the whole backstory on that. But cool story on Whiskey Row, 1910, right? Pick this glass up, right? It's going to have a little bit darker hue to it. There was a fire on our bottling line on Whiskey Row. We were taking whiskey out of our barrels and putting them into bottles. The fire happened, and now the whiskey was going to spoil, okay? This is 1910. There was no such thing as double oaked or double barreled whiskey back then. The folks at Old Forester and Brown-Forman started to panic. They didn't want this whiskey to spoil because as soon as you take it out of the barrel, it'll start to oxidize. You got to bottle that right away. They didn't know what to do, but they looked to the left, they looked to the right, they looked behind them, and there was a bunch of barrels of virgin oak bourbon. Virgin oak barrel bourbon. Bourbon barrels. Holy shit. First time, huh? Yeah, all right, let me get out of here. Oh, shake it off. So they looked to the left, they looked to the right, and there was an open barrel, a bunch of barrels. So they had to do something with that whiskey. They threw it in those barrels, and they forgot about it. About a year later, this is a true story. This sounds like a whole myth, right? A year later, they were back in the warehouse. They discovered those barrels. They tasted it, and they realized, by happenstance, they just, by mistake, made the first double-barreled bourbon. All right? Who else makes double-barrel bourbon? Woodford. That's another one of our brands, all right? They call it double oaked, but back in 1910, we called it double barreled. So if you're talking about the maturation of 1910, this is a 78 corn, 18 rye, 10 malted, 72 corn, 18 rye, 10 malted barley. It's a 4-year aged bourbon, and then to coincide with 1910 storyline, we aged it again for 8 months in charred oak barrels. Anybody knows by a show of hands what charring a barrel does to the whiskey? How about you in the Samuel L. Jackson hat? Four. So raise a hand. Who's had an English muffin? Oh, Mike, where are we? Jeez. Who toasts their bread at night or in the morning, right? Well, perfect. There we go. All right. All the nooks and crannies. So when you toast your bread, it kind of chars the bread, and it opens up all these little kernels and granules for the butter to leak in. It's the same ideology behind a barrel of whiskey. You start with these white American oak staves, right? So basically, Brown-Forman, we own a bunch of forests, take the trees down, replant them, obviously, and then we take these staves of this white American oak, and we put them out in our yard to let them season. So seasoning the wood does a few things, right? It dries them out, right? Because we don't want water when we're aging our whiskey. Water evaporates, and it takes a lot of the alcohol away. So they take all these white staves of white American oak. They leave them from 18 to 24 months out in our yards. Those woods, all those American oak woods, they season, and they grow in flavor. All their pores tighten up, okay? Once those pores tighten up, they cut those pieces of wood down, and they make our barrels. Then our cooperage that we own, our coopers take the whiskey and they put them, before they put it in the barrel, they char them. So they have a big barrel, a big white American oak barrel, and they scorch the inside with hot fire. There's a chemical reaction that happens with white American oak. It turns caramel flavors, right? All these essences of oak that we know, nutmeg, caramel, vanilla. Without that torching of the oak, you don't get those flavors. So you torch the oak, you put the barrels in there, and then the barrels go to the rick houses. The rick houses where all the magic happens, okay? So the rick houses are all around Louisville and all of our warehouses. And there's anywhere from 5,000 to 10,000 barrels of whiskey that are sitting there slowly aging our spirit. So what happens inside those barrels, right? Temperature, right? Time, temperature, and location is the most valuable asset whiskey has to mature. So you put the whiskey in these charred oak barrels, and you let them sit for 4 to 23 years. And in the summer, it gets hot. In the winter, it gets cold. At night, it gets cold. It rains. It snows. It sleets. And what do we know about water and temperature? As it gets hot and cold, those barrels expand. So hot, it expands. When it's cold, it contracts. So basically what that barrel is doing is breathing the whiskey. It's sucking all that whiskey into those English muffin or caramelized bread pores in. And then when it gets cold, it pushes it back out. So then we call that whiskey breathing. So, for example, 1910 is a 4-year age statement. So for 4 years, that whiskey is breathing in and out of those barrels. And then the other thing is the amount of char we put in those barrels. So your classic char for a Kentucky bourbon is around 2 to 3, okay? That's where you incinerate the barrel for about 15 to 25 seconds, get that char going. For 1910, we take that barrel once again at a level 4. We call that an alligator char. Raise of hands. Anybody knows what an alligator char is? What do you got there, brother? What do you know about alligator chars?
Well, it just means it burns long enough it chars the wood.
Okay, that's a half answer. I get you a prize. So it burns enough almost to the point of incineration. So if I hold this garbage can up, right, this almost looks like a level 4 char. They burn the barrel so much it looks like the back of an alligator's skin. It's heavily charred, incinerated, all these nooks and valleys and granules. That's for more whiskey to go and develop. So we hold this bottle, this whole glass of 1910 in the air. Take a look at the color. It's still the same age statement, all right? So the color is not going to be that much off, but you have that secondary barrel char, so it should be a little bit darker. But we all know that char adds flavor, right? So put it up to your nose. Let's get that initial snort. What are we thinking? Raise your hands. Let's keep this open. You love it? He loves it? Love it, love it, love it. So you're going to get a cherry bomb on this one. You know, cherry preserves, lighter, brighter citrus. Bananas, we're getting a little bananas, 100%. The barrels also mellow out the whiskey as well. Younger whiskey is a lot sharp and thinner, a little astringent. We don't want that. We want heavy char. We want slow and low maturation. That gives you more of a mellow whiskey flavor. The issue, raise your hands. Who's had like a 23-year-old bourbon? Right? Not many here because you know why? That's too much wood contact. The sweet spot for American whiskey is around 8 to 12 years. That's that super high end, that honey hole. Every time you let your whiskey mature too long, it becomes a little too tannic. So, you know, I think Pappy has a 23. That's a very, very rare, amazing spirit. A lot of people can't pull that off. So, intense melody of cherry preserves, drippy caramel, dark chocolate, thickened maple syrup, and seasoned oak spiciness. We take that first sip, right? Do that Kentucky chew. Let that whiskey go down your jowls, around your tongue. Blow it out. Do not get that Kentucky chokehold. And we're getting dark caramel, coats of layers of malt, nuttiness, sweet graham cracker, all warmed by green peppercorn, coriander spice, brightened with a hint of cedar. What do you guys think, man? 1910, you like that or no? This is a little lower, and I expect that from the round of applause. This is at 93. So we went from 1870 at 90 to 1897 at 100, and then we lowered the proof a little bit. This is more almost a Scotch-esque American bourbon. Not my favorite. It is an amazing spirit. The next one, 1920, is my favorite.
All right, guys. I hope y'all left some room in those stomachs of yours because dessert is on its way right now. So Ethan made just a classic peach cobbler with a bourbon-infused whipped cream that's coming out now. Just came out of the oven. It's still nice and warm, topped with a nice little raspberry. So y'all enjoy, guys.
Guys, give it up for Chef Ethan and this kitchen staff. Just absolutely killing it tonight. We got a lovely little peach cobbler coming out. Along with that peach cobbler, we have our second to last whiskey to taste. This is our Old Forester 1920 Prohibition blend. Raise your hand. Who's heard about Prohibition? Let me get a boo for Prohibition. Fucking right on. Cool fun fact about Old Forester, right? We started bottling our bourbon in 1870. During Prohibition, there was something called the Volstead Act. Anybody heard of the Volstead Act? Yes, sir, right there. It pretty much told anyone in the country you could not sell, produce, manufacture, or drink spirits. It was a dark, dirty, awful time in our country, and thank God we got out of it. Fun fact about Old Forester bourbon, right? So during Prohibition, the government only gave 6 medicinal licenses to produce and sell whiskey, right? A medicinal license. George Garvin Brown said, I want one. Government said, no problem, George, and gave us one. Obviously, it wasn't that easy, but we were one of the 6 distillers to receive a medicinal license to produce whiskey during Prohibition. And that leads into the 1920 variant. So this one is 115 proof, right? So it's a little higher. We're screaming alcohol here. We talked about earlier in my TED Talk tonight. Higher alcohol, more oil, more flavor, right? So Old Forester 1920 comes off the still into the barrel at 100 proof. Interesting scientific fact, during the maturation process where some of the water in whiskey evaporates, the alcohol goes higher and it goes up in proof. So this whiskey is poured into the barrel at 100 proof and then bottled at 115. A beautiful sweet spot. So take that glass, put it in the air, take a look at the color profile of that, smooth amber honey, a little bit caramel color. Take that to your nose, make sure your mouth is open. We're getting to some high alcohol territory. We want to breathe that into the nose and out through the mouth. We're going to get really heavy cherry preserves. We're going to get dark caramel, citrus, and spice. Take that first sip in, let that coat your mouth, coat your tongue. Tell me what you are feeling right now, sir.
That's good.
That's good. He said it best, baby. That's that 1920 going through your soul. What are you tasting?
Warm and fuzzy.
He's getting all warm and fuzzy. All right. Let me get a check on table 12. This is our most highly allocated variant of Whiskey Row. Obviously, our fans love our high alcohol, our high flavor, and the 1920 is almost the purest expression of Prohibition bourbon. Let me hear you say, yeah. Let me hear you say, Blair. Yeah. Guys, round of applause for Blair and his team, man. What a great night. So one thing every year Old Forester does, and Brown-Forman, Woodford Reserve, all the greats, is we offer people to do barrel picks, right? Come into town, come in our rick house, and taste and go through our rick houses and taste something that they usually can't buy, purchase at the store, and they pick it out, and we label it for them, and that's their own pick. So Blair and his team, for the second year in a row, has a Florida Cracker pick.
Yeah, no, it's actually been special and very rare. I think there's only 4 barrels allocated to the whole state this year, and we are selected for one of them. And I got to give a big shout out to the whole Breakthrough crew back there and the Brown-Forman crew for allowing us to get our second barrel pick of the Old Forester Single Barrel Select, because usually you might get one in your career, and we got 2 in our career. So, it's very special. So.
It's so special that on this little tasting here, I'm going to have Blair give you guys the tasting notes, huh? He picked it. He knows about it. We're going to sniff it together, okay? What do you guys think? So while we're going to taste Blair and Florida Cracker's tick, we're going to use a special glass here. You guys all have a big fluted glass or tulip-shaped glass called the Glencairn, right? Glencairn is a staple in the whiskey industry for tasting, okay? It's the same reason that you don't drink wine out of a rocks glass. It's all about aromatics, right? So the whole point of this Glencairn is we talked about earlier, right? So before Blair goes into the tasting notes, hold this glass up in the air, right? This is where you're really going to see those legs, right? So this Florida Cracker pick number 2, this is screaming. This comes at 132.1 proof, all right? That's not bad, man, right? We talked about it. More alcohol, more oil, more flavor. So rip this glass around in the air, not to be fancy, but you want to see all the fat deposits and all the oils stick to the side of the glass. Higher alcohol, more oils. You got an 80 proof bourbon, it's going to slide right down. You got 132, it's going to stick to the sides. Go ahead, sir.
Well, guys, this being 132 proof, you always have the option when you do a barrel pick, if you would like to water it down to lower the proof. And I'm not a believer in that in the bourbon world. I'm a believer that let the angel share happen and let the natural flavor that it's picked up during that. If you try to water it down, you're gonna lose some of those flavors and tastes that you have. So with it being 132, of course, we only got 26 cases for the whole barrel when it got shipped to us. But y'all smell it real quick. Tell me what y'all smell.
You get a little cherry in there.
And of course, everybody's going to be a little different with what you grab on it. But little fish, not no fish. For me, what I really smell is that deep vanilla, the deep vanilla and caramel coming out into it, and that's and if y'all know what the angel shares and how those barrels work in that ricket, they're expanding and contracting, contracting, and the more that happens, the more you're going to get those flavors in and out, coming in and out on there. So for me, what I liked about this barrel pick is just how rich the actual flavors are, especially that vanilla that comes through. And it resides. Once you get past the burn, of course, right? But as it resides, it just sticks with you. It sticks with you. So, guys, bottoms up. And, hey, guys, thank y'all very much tonight. Enjoy.